A woman arrested in Ciudad Juarez is accused of conducting a very chilling operation.
The internet lost its mind when a midnight video surfaced, grainy, shaking, raw as a wound torn open in the dark. A convoy of roaring engines tearing through Texas scrubland, headlights slicing the black like surgical knives through flesh. Dust rising like smoke from a battlefield that never made the news. And at the center of it all, a woman they called La Reina del Silencio, the Queen of Silence, handcuffed, hooded, and worth $200 million. $200 million. Let that number burn in your mind for a moment. Not for drugs. Not for guns. Not for the usual blood currency that flows across that scarred borderline like an infected river. No, this was different. This was darker. This cut deeper into the bone of what we pretend civilization means. The footage went viral in 17 minutes. 17 minutes before the scrubbers came, before the content disappeared, before the official denial started rolling in like fog over a crime scene. But by then, millions had seen it. Millions had watched those engines roar. Millions had seen the silhouette of a woman, small and still, surrounded by men whose faces were hidden behind bandanas and rage. But this wasn't a movie. This wasn't some Hollywood fever dream cooked up in a writer's room in Burbank. This was a message, written in dust and gasoline and the kind of fury that doesn't fade when the cameras stop rolling. Let me break down what really happened. Because what they're not telling you. That's where the truth lives. That's where the blood is still wet. Her real name, Marta Alicia Aguilar. Say it slowly. Let each syllable settle. Because across the border, in the alleyways of Juarez where even the streetlights seemed to flicker with fear, her whisper carried another name, the Ghost Queen of Juarez. La Reina del Silencio. The Queen of Silence. And God, did she earn that silence? Not through violence alone, though there was violence, make no mistake. But through something far more insidious, far more calculated.
Pregnant women, she would carry out illegal C-sections, then harvest the mom's organs, and then sell newborns to couples in the United States for up to 250,000 pesos.
She controlled information like a master puppeteer controls strings. She controlled identity like a magician controls reality. She made people disappear. Not in the way you're thinking, not in shallow graves or acid barrels, though those existed too in her empire, but in ways that erased them from existence itself. Birth certificates that never were. Death certificates that appeared out of nowhere. Names that changed like water flowing downhill, always finding the path of least resistance, always slipping through the cracks of bureaucracy that most of us never even knew existed. She understood something fundamental about our modern world. That identity is just paper and pixels. That personhood is just a file in a database. And if you control the files, if you control the databases, you control who exists and who doesn't. The stories that filtered back across the border, the ones that made it past the wall of silence she'd built around her operations, they spoke of disappearing mothers. Young women, desperate, pregnant, crossing north with hope blazing in their hearts like the last match in a dark room. They'd heard about opportunities, about clinics, about American families waiting with open arms and open wallets. They'd heard about La Reina del Silencio, though they didn't know her by that name. To them she was a facilitator, a helper, a woman who understood their pain and offered them a way out. But hope in her hands became a business model. Black market adoptions tied to medical syndicates that operated in the shadows between two nations, in the legal gray zones where American law ended and Mexican law looked the other way. Clinics that existed on paper but not in any registry you could verify. Doctors whose credentials were as real as $3 bills but whose surgical skills were sharp enough to cut through the last threads of humanity. The mothers would arrive. Scared. Hopeful. Desperate. The babies would leave. Wrapped in blankets that cost more than their mothers earned in a year. Heading to homes in Houston, in Dallas, in Phoenix, in Los Angeles. Homes where questions weren't asked because the paperwork was perfect. Because the charitable organizations that facilitated these adoptions had sterling reputations and 501c3 tax statuses. And the mothers? The mothers disappeared. Some made it back across the border with empty arms and empty eyes and stories they could never tell because who would believe them? Who would care? They were illegals. They were criminals for crossing in the first place. Their pain didn't register on any scale that mattered to the people in power. Others never made it back at all. The Ghost Queen understood silence not just as the absence of sound, but as the absence of witness. As the erasure of testimony. As the careful, methodical destruction of any trail that could lead back to her. She was 43 years old when the federal net finally tightened. 43 years of building an empire on the bones of broken families. 43 years of turning human desperation into profit margins that would make Fortune 500 CEOs weep with envy. But she didn't look 43 in the photos that eventually leaked. She looked timeless, ageless, like something carved from ice and cruelty, with eyes that held the kind of emptiness you only see in predators who've forgotten they were ever prey. They say she kept files, meticulous records. Not because she had to, she was too smart for that, too careful, but because she wanted to. Because each file was a trophy. Each disappeared mother was a victory. Each successfully laundered baby was proof of her genius, her untouchability. The psychological profile that federal agents later compiled, the one they tried to keep sealed, the one that leaked anyway because everything leaks eventually, it painted a picture of someone who'd crossed a line so far back in her past that she couldn't even see it in the rearview mirror anymore. Childhood trauma, they speculated. Early abuse, they theorized. The usual psychological buzzwords that we use to make sense of the senseless. But here's what they missed, what they always miss. Some people aren't broken by their past. Some people are forged by it. Tempered. Sharpened into weapons that cut through the world with such precision that the world doesn't even bleed until they're long gone. La Reina del Silencio was a weapon. And she'd been cutting through the border zone for 2 decades before anyone even realized she existed. You want to understand how this happened? How one woman built an empire worth hundreds of millions on human suffering? Then you need to understand the machinery. The system. The hidden economy that thrives in the shadows between 2 nations that pretend to be at peace. Picture this. A woman in Michoacan, 22 years old, pregnant, terrified. Her boyfriend disappeared 3 months ago. Probably dead, probably cartel, probably both. She has no money. No education past 6th grade. No options that don't end in poverty or prostitution or both. Then she hears about the clinics. Word of mouth mostly. Whispers in the markets. Cousins of friends of neighbors who made the crossing and came back with American dollars and stories of easy procedures, of helping childless couples, of doing something good while getting paid. She makes contact through a broker, usually another woman, someone who looks trustworthy, someone who speaks the language of desperation fluently. The broker explains the process. You cross north, you go to the clinic, you give birth, the baby goes to a loving American family, you get $20,000 cash. $20,000. That's more money than she's seen in her entire life. That's enough to start over. That's enough to escape. The broker takes her across. Not through the desert with the coyotes and the death marches. No, this is a cleaner operation. False documents. Tourist visas. Sometimes even chartered buses that cross at legitimate checkpoints because the papers are that good. She arrives at the clinic. It's in Texas usually. Sometimes New Mexico. The facility looks legitimate enough. Clean floors. Medical equipment. People in scrubs who use words like prenatal care, and maternal health, and adoption services. She signs papers. A lot of papers. Papers she can't read because they're in English, but the translator, always another woman, always someone who seems kind, assures her it's all standard. All legal. All above board. She gives birth. And then the machinery really kicks in. The baby is whisked away immediately. For testing, they tell her. Standard procedure. She's exhausted, in pain, pumped full of drugs she doesn't recognize. She sleeps. When she wakes up, they tell her the baby is already with the adoptive family. They tell her it's better this way. Cleaner. Less emotional attachment. They give her an envelope with cash, but it's not 20,000. It's 5,000. Maybe 7 if she's lucky. She protests. The kind translator is gone. In her place are men with hard eyes and harder voices. They explain very carefully that she signed contracts. That she agreed to this. That if she makes trouble, she'll be reported to immigration, to the police, to authorities on both sides of the border who would be very interested in her illegal crossing and her participation in black market activities. She's given a bus ticket back to the border. Sometimes she makes it across. Sometimes she disappears along the way. The baby, meanwhile, enters a pipeline so sophisticated it would make any Fortune 500 supply chain manager nod in appreciation. Shell charities with names like Hope Bridge Adoptions, or New Beginnings Family Services, or Cross-Border Children's Alliance. Websites with stock photos of smiling families. Testimonials from grateful parents. All the markers of legitimacy. American couples, desperate for children, willing to pay premium prices, not asking too many questions because they're so close to their dream they can taste it. They pay the adoption fees. $40,000. $60,000. Sometimes $100,000 for a healthy infant. The money flows through layers of corporate structures designed to obscure its origins. LLCs registered in Delaware. Offshore accounts in the Caymans. Bitcoin transactions that leave no paper trail. By the time it reaches La Reina del Silencio's accounts, it's been washed so clean it practically sparkles. But the real genius of her operation wasn't the money laundering. It was the leverage. She kept files on everyone. The American couples who bought babies, she had their names, their addresses, their financial records. The doctors who facilitated the births and signed the fraudulent certificates, she had evidence that could end their careers and land them in prison. The brokers, the translators, the border officials who looked the other way, she had dirt on all of them. She didn't just build a criminal enterprise. She built a network of complicity so vast and so interconnected that bringing her down would mean bringing down hundreds of others. Prominent others. Wealthy others. Others with political connections and legal resources. In her hands, hope became a business model. Desperation became a commodity. Human life became a transaction. And the system, our system, the one we pretend is civilized and just, it let her thrive for 20 years. 20 years. Think about that. While politicians argued about border security and immigration reform and family separation policies, La Reina del Silencio was separating families by the hundreds, by the thousands. And nobody noticed. Nobody cared. Because her victims were invisible. They were illegals. They were criminals by definition of their crossing. Their pain didn't register because we built a system that required their pain to be invisible for the system to function. She understood this. She exploited it. She became rich beyond measure by recognizing a fundamental truth about the border. It's not a line on a map. It's a wound in the flesh of two nations. And wounds, when they're left untreated, when they're allowed to fester, they become infected. She was the infection. And she spread until the whole system was sick with her presence. When federal agents finally raided her Juarez compound, they found files. Rooms full of files. Computers. Hard drives. USB sticks hidden in false walls. Documents stuffed in freezers and buried in gardens and sealed in waterproof containers dropped down wells. The kind of evidence that would take years to process. The kind of evidence that would fill courtrooms and destroy careers and rewrite the narrative of cross-border crime for a generation. But they didn't find the queen. La Reina del Silencio had vanished. The raid came at dawn, because raids always come at dawn, as if criminality sleeps in until a reasonable hour. Federal agents from both sides of the border, coordinating in a rare show of international cooperation. DA, FBI, Mexican Federal Police, Interpol observers. Helicopters. Armored vehicles. The full show of force designed to intimidate and overwhelm. They breached the compound expecting resistance. They found abandoned rooms and cold coffee and computers still logged into encrypted accounts. She'd known they were coming. Of course she'd known. When you build an empire on information and silence, you don't neglect your own security. She had people inside law enforcement on both sides of the border. She knew about the investigation months before the raid. She knew exactly when to disappear. But she didn't run far. That was the strangest part. That was what kept the investigators up at night, staring at maps and timelines and wondering if they'd missed something fundamental about who they were hunting. False sightings started almost immediately. A nun crossing near El Paso, face obscured by her habit, but something about the eyes, something about the way she moved. A passport scanned twice in a single day at different border crossings 300 miles apart. Physically impossible unless the passport was cloned, but the scans showed different timestamps, different agents, different systems. A woman matching her description boarding a private plane in Chihuahua. Another woman matching her description checking into a hospital in Tijuana. A third spotted at a restaurant in Monterrey, eating alone, watching the news coverage of her own manhunt on the television above the bar. The federal task force assigned to track her, they called themselves Operation Ghost Hunt, which shows you how seriously they took the threat. They chased every lead, every shadow, every whisper. They found nothing. Or rather, they found too much. Too many sightings. Too many contradictions. Too many pieces of evidence that seemed designed to lead them in circles. She was playing with them. The psychological warfare expert they brought in, a woman who'd spent 20 years profiling narco-traffickers and cartel leaders, she explained it in terms that sent chills down the spines of everyone in the briefing room. She's not hiding, the expert said. She's hunting. The only question is what she's hunting for. Weeks passed. The media attention faded. The 24-hour news cycle moved on to fresh horrors, new outrages, shinier distractions. The federal agents remained, but their numbers dwindled. Budget constraints. Manpower shortages. The usual bureaucratic entropy that kills investigations more effectively than any criminal ever could. And then, on a night when the moon was nothing but a fingernail scratch against the dark, when the desert stretched out silent and still like the held breath before a scream. The sound of Harley engines shattered the silence. They came from the north. Not the south like you'd expect. Not from Mexico, where the cartels operate with military precision and governmental immunity. No, they came roaring down from Oklahoma, through the panhandle, engines screaming like demons fleeing heaven. Dusty roads that don't appear on any GPS, oil fields where the pump jacks nod like mechanical birds drinking from the earth's black blood. Towns so small they don't have names, just numbers on county maps that even the county forgot about. No insignias at first. No patches. No colors. Just leather and chrome and the kind of purposeful violence that doesn't need announcement. 23 motorcycles in formation. Military formation. Not the chaotic roar of weekend warriors playing outlaw. This was tactical. This was planned. This was practiced. They rode two abreast in perfect spacing. No headlights until they hit the county roads. Hand signals passed back through the formation like ripples in dark water. They moved like a single organism, like a predator that had spotted prey and was closing in for the kill.
In the middle of the formation, protected on all sides, rode 3 bikes carrying passengers. Large men, faces hidden behind masks that looked like skulls. Not Halloween skulls. Combat skulls. The kind military contractors wear in war zones where the rules of engagement are more like gentle suggestions. The convoy hit the main highway at exactly 2:17 a.m. We know the time because a trucker's dashcam caught 30 seconds of footage before he wisely pulled over and let them pass. In that footage, you can see the precision. The purpose. The absolute certainty of men who know exactly where they're going and what they're going to do when they get there. They exited the highway 12 miles south. Took a farm road that wound through scrubland where the mesquite grows thick and the cattle fences stretch to horizons you can't see. Another 4 miles on gravel that turned to dirt that turned to nothing but tire tracks and the memory of rain. And there, in a clearing surrounded by nothing but darkness and the weight of 1,000 stars, they found what they were looking for. A cartel safe house. Not a compound. Not a fortress. Just a single-story ranch house that had seen better decades, surrounded by 3 SUVs with tinted windows and modified suspensions. Guards outside, 4 of them visible, probably more inside. AK-47s held casual but ready. The kind of lazy alertness that comes from months of nothing happening, from the assumption that nobody would be stupid enough to hit a cartel safe house in the middle of Texas. The bikers killed their engines a quarter mile out. Think about that. 23 Harley-Davidsons, each one loud enough to wake the dead, and they shut them down in perfect unison. Let momentum carry them forward. Let gravity do the work. Silent now except for the whisper of tires on dirt and the night wind through the mesquite. The guards never knew what hit them. Non-lethal. That was the strange part. That was what made investigators later question everything they thought they knew about this operation. The bikers could have killed the guards. Should have killed them, by any tactical calculation. But they didn't. Taser rounds. Rubber bullets. Blunt force trauma applied with surgical precision. The guards went down hard but alive, zip-tied and gagged and left breathing in the dirt. The bikers moved through the house like smoke. Like ghosts themselves. They knew the layout, that became obvious later when the FBI reconstructed the timeline. They knew exactly which room to hit, which doors to breach, which windows to cover. 90 seconds from first contact to extraction. 90 seconds. Special Forces operators train for years to move that fast, that clean. These were bikers. Supposedly. Men in leather and denim moving with the precision of elite military units. They emerged carrying a woman. Small. Hooded. Hands zip-tied behind her back. She wasn't fighting. Wasn't struggling. Just walking between 2 massive bikers like she was attending a funeral procession for someone she didn't particularly like. The visual symmetry of it, bikers in formation on one side, cartel SUVs on the other, and this small hooded figure in the middle, it looked like something out of a fever dream. Like religious art painted by someone who'd seen too much violence and not enough redemption. They loaded her onto one of the bikes. The passenger seat of the center formation. Secured her with professional efficiency. Then they fired up the engines again, all 23 roaring to life in a symphony of American iron and high-octane fury. The convoy reformed. Pulled out. Headed north. Behind them, the cartel guards were starting to wake up, starting to process what had just happened, starting to reach for their phones and their radios and their excuses. Ahead of them, the empty highway stretched out like a promise or a threat, depending on which side of the law you stood on. And in the middle of it all, secured to a Harley-Davidson and worth $200 million, La Reina del Silencio rode into the Texas night. They didn't come for revenge. They came for leverage. Hours after the abduction, and let's call it what it was, an abduction, because when you take someone against their will at gunpoint, even if that someone is a monster, even if that someone deserves worse than they're getting, it's still an abduction. Hours after, the messages started appearing. Not on the cartel channels you'd expect. Not through the usual intermediaries and negotiators who handle these things with the discretion of funeral directors arranging viewings. No. They appeared on the internet. Reddit first. A throwaway account posting in r/unresolved mysteries with a single line, $200 million $96H/crypto only. No context. No explanation. Just numbers and a deadline. The post stayed up for 7 minutes before moderators deleted it. But 7 minutes is an eternity in internet time. Screenshots spread. People started digging. Started connecting dots. Then it appeared on 4chan. Same message. Different anonymous poster. This time with an image attached, a photograph of a hooded figure on a motorcycle, grainy and dark but unmistakable. Then Twitter. A burner account posting the same message with hashtags that made no sense, hashtag Queen of Silence, hashtag Juarez Justice, hashtag Border Balance. Then Instagram. Facebook. TikTok. Telegram. Signal. Every social media platform you could name and several you probably couldn't. The message was spreading like a virus. Like a contagion. Each post slightly different, each one adding tiny new details. A Bitcoin wallet address here. A Monero code there. Deadman switches and encryption keys and digital breadcrumbs that led nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. Federal cyber teams scrambled to trace the sources. They found VPNs routing through 17 countries. Tor nodes bouncing signals through the dark web like pinballs. IP addresses that resolved to Starbucks locations and public libraries, and hacked routers in suburban homes where the owners had no idea their internet was being weaponized. The message itself was cryptic by design. $200 million, obviously the ransom amount. 96H, 4 days, counting down from the moment of the first post. Crypto only, payment in cryptocurrency, untraceable, irreversible. But here's where it got strange. Here's where the federal investigators started looking at each other with expressions that mingled confusion and dawning horror. Multiple groups started claiming authorship of the message. A cartel cell in Sinaloa posted a video claiming La Reina had stolen from them, that the ransom was compensation for years of unpaid tribute. Their proof, detailed ledgers of transactions, names and dates and amounts that checked out against federal databases. A biker gang in El Paso, not the same crew that executed the snatch, but connected somehow, tangled in the same dark web, they posted their own claim. Said they were collecting bounties on behalf of the disappeared. The mothers who never came home. The families torn apart. Their proof, a list of names, hundreds of names, each one a woman who'd entered La Reina's pipeline and vanished. Then came the really disturbing claim. An encrypted message board, the kind that requires 3 levels of security clearance just to know it exists, posted communications suggesting rogue intelligence operatives were behind the whole thing. That La Reina had been providing information to foreign governments. That her network wasn't just criminal, it was geopolitical. That the kidnapping wasn't about money at all. Their proof, classified documents. Fragments of emails. Metadata that matched known CIA operation codes from the early 2000s. The ransom message became a Rorschach test. Everyone saw what they wanted to see. What they needed to see to make sense of a senseless situation. News media ate it up. Cable networks ran 24-hour coverage with graphics and talking heads and experts who couldn't agree on basic facts. Was this extortion? Was this terrorism? Was this some kind of vigilante justice? The narrator in me, the part that's been watching this story unfold from the shadows, that's been collecting pieces of truth like shards of broken glass, wants to ask the question nobody else was asking. Was this extortion or exposure? Think about it. Really think. If you wanted to ransom La Reina del Silencio, why broadcast it to the world? Why not handle it quietly, professionally, the way these things are usually handled? A phone call to the right people. A negotiation in the dark. Money changes hands, problem solved. But this was the opposite of quiet. This was a spotlight. This was every news organization on the planet suddenly paying attention to a woman most people had never heard of. This was federal agencies being forced to acknowledge an investigation they'd been trying to keep under wraps. This was someone, or multiple someones, saying, "Look at this. Look at what she did. Look at what we allowed to happen." The Bitcoin wallet address received thousands of transactions in the first 12 hours. Not millions. Not the ransom amount. But small amounts. $5. $10. $50. From accounts all over the world. People weren't paying a ransom. They were leaving tips. They were participating in whatever this was. They were buying tickets to a show they didn't fully understand but couldn't look away from. The federal response was predictable and pathetic in equal measure. Official statements claiming there was no credible threat. Press releases assuring the public that law enforcement had the situation under control. Background briefings with journalists emphasizing that paying ransoms only encourages more kidnappings. But behind the scenes, in conference rooms with locked doors and white noise generators to prevent electronic eavesdropping, the truth was darker. They had no idea who was behind this. They had no idea where La Reina was being held. They had no idea if she was even still alive. The 96-hour deadline ticked down like a bomb nobody could defuse. And somewhere in the Texas darkness, engines were still roaring. The codename leaked 3 days after the convoy footage went viral. Operation Red Crossbones. Not some intern's creative flourish. Not a random word generator spitting out alphabet soup. This was intentional. This was chosen. This meant something to the people who chose it. Red for blood. Crossbones for death. Or maybe Red Cross for aid organizations. Bones for what's left after the flesh is stripped away. Either way, it meant the federal government had been preparing for this. Had known this was coming. Had created a task force specifically designed to handle what they privately called a hostage situation involving a high-value criminal target with significant political complications. That's bureaucrat speak for, we have no idea what we're doing but we need to look competent while we figure it out. The task force formed 48 hours after the convoy incident. Multi-agency. Multi-jurisdictional. The kind of alphabet soup collaboration that looks great in press releases and functions like a clusterfuck in practice. FBI providing investigative resources and hostage negotiation expertise. DEA contributing their knowledge of cartel operations and cross-border criminal networks. ATF because motorcycles and firearms. ICE because border. The Texas Rangers because, well, because this was Texas and they don't take kindly to outsiders coming in and making their state look like the Wild West, even though it kind of is. And quietly, in the background, military intelligence assets. The kind that don't officially exist. The kind that operate in the gray zones between law enforcement and warfare, between domestic and foreign, between legal and expedient. But here's what made Operation Red Crossbones different. Here's what kept the investigators up at night, smoking cigarettes they'd quit 5 years ago, staring at whiteboards covered in connections and contradictions. Leaked documents, and everything leaks eventually, remember that, suggested someone inside law enforcement had fed coordinates to civilians. Not accidentally. Not through some security breach or hacked database. Deliberately. Someone with access to federal surveillance data, to cartel intelligence, to real-time tracking of La Reina's movements through the underground railroad of safe houses and secret crossings she'd used for decades. Someone had looked at that data and decided the law wasn't moving fast enough. The courts weren't harsh enough. Justice wasn't just enough. Someone had decided to outsource the problem. The leaked documents were fragments. Encrypted emails with most of the metadata stripped. Phone records showing calls to burner numbers. Financial transactions moving through offshore accounts to motorcycle clubs with known criminal affiliations. The investigators couldn't prove it. Couldn't prosecute it. Could barely even talk about it without triggering turf wars and jurisdictional battles and the kind of political infighting that makes actual crime fighting impossible. But they knew. They knew someone in their ranks had betrayed the badge. Had violated their oath. Had decided that the ends justified the means, that getting La Reina off the streets was worth bending every rule and breaking every protocol. And the worst part? The part that kept the good cops, and there were still some good cops, believe it or not, up at night? They weren't sure they disagreed. The informant betrayal theme ran through Operation Red Crossbones like a cancer. Nobody trusted anybody. Every meeting was a potential leak. Every phone call could be monitored. Every email could be forwarded to the wrong people. The task force fractured. DEA suspected FBI of holding back information. FBI suspected Texas Rangers of cowboy theatrics. Everyone suspected the military intelligence assets of having their own agenda that had nothing to do with law enforcement and everything to do with protecting classified operations. The bikers who'd executed the snatch, they remained ghosts. No arrests. No raids. No hard evidence linking any specific motorcycle club to the operation. Oh, there were theories. Plenty of theories. The Bandidos. The Mongols. The Outlaws. Every 1%er club in the Southwest was floated as a suspect. But none of them fit perfectly. None of them had the resources, the discipline, the sheer operational security to pull off something this sophisticated. Unless they had help. Unless someone inside the system was running interference. Providing intelligence. Clearing the path. The leaked communications suggested exactly that. One email in particular, sent from a Proton Mail account to an encrypted signal number, contained a single line that became the smoking gun nobody could properly load. Package location confirmed. Window closes Thursday 0200. After that, she ghosts again. Package. That's what they called her. Like she was a shipment. A delivery. A problem to be solved through logistics and timing. The timestamp on that email was 6 hours before the convoy raid. 6 hours. Whoever sent it had real-time intelligence on La Reina's location. Had access to surveillance or informants or technology that could track her through the underground network she'd built over 2 decades. And they'd given that intelligence to people who had no legal authority to act on it. Who had no accountability. Who operated outside the system because the system had failed. If true, and every investigator in Operation Red Crossbones believed it was true even if they couldn't prove it, then this wasn't a capture. This was a handoff. The federal government, or at least elements within it, had decided that La Reina del Silencio couldn't be prosecuted. Too many complications. Too many powerful people implicated in her networks. Too many international incidents waiting to happen if her files ever saw the inside of a courtroom. Better to let her disappear differently. Let the streets handle what the courts couldn't. And if she died in the process? If the bikers decided $200 million wasn't worth keeping her alive? If she ended up in pieces scattered across the desert? Well, that would solve a lot of problems, wouldn't it? The cynicism of it. The calculated coldness. The willingness to sacrifice every principle of justice and due process and rule of law because it was expedient. That's what kept the good investigators up at night. Not the crime. Not the violence. Not even the kidnapping. The betrayal. The knowledge that someone wearing the same badge, swearing the same oath, had decided that some people don't deserve the protection of the law. That some monsters are too monstrous to be handled by the system designed to handle monsters. Operation Red Crossbones became less about finding La Reina and more about finding the leak. The betrayer. The Judas in their midst. They never did. By the time the 96-hour deadline hit its halfway point, the border had become a pressure cooker ready to explode. Mexican special units massing near Ojinaga. Not the regular federals. Not the police forces that everyone knew were half-corrupted and fully compromised. These were Marina, Mexican Marines, the only force the government still trusted to take on the cartels without immediately switching sides. They set up checkpoints every 5 miles. Helicopters circling overhead. Drones buzzing through the airspace like mechanical mosquitoes. The kind of military presence you usually only see when a head of state visits or a revolution is brewing. On the American side, similar escalation. U.S. drones, the big ones, the Reapers and Predators usually reserved for war zones, scanning ranches near San Angelo. Thermal imaging. Facial recognition. License plate readers on every highway within a 100-mile radius. Border Patrol tripled their shifts. National Guard units activated. The Texas Department of Public Safety running interdiction operations that looked more like counterinsurgency than law enforcement. And in the spaces between all that official presence, in the cracks and shadows where authority fears to tread, something else was building. Social media had gone absolutely feral. TikTok videos of teenagers claiming to have spotted the convoy. Instagram posts showing motorcycle clubs mobilizing across 3 states. Twitter threads spinning conspiracy theories that ranged from plausible to paranoid to completely fucking insane. The hashtags multiplied like bacteria in a petri dish. Hashtag GhostQueen, hashtag Border War, hashtag Justice for Juarez, hashtag 200 million dead, hashtag Silent No More. But it was the cryptic emojis and coded posts that really got the federal cyber analysts sweating. A crown emoji followed by a motorcycle followed by crossbones. Repeated thousands of times across multiple platforms by accounts with no apparent connection to each other. GPS coordinates posted as seemingly random number strings. When plotted on a map, they formed patterns. Triangles. Arrows. All pointing toward a zone in West Texas where nothing existed but ranch land and oil fields and the kind of emptiness that swallows secrets whole. The federal analysts tried to shut it down. Contacted platform administrators. Requested takedowns. Threatened legal action. The posts multiplied. For every account they suspended, 3 more appeared. The internet had decided this was a story worth telling, and the internet doesn't take kindly to being told to shut up. Real people, regular civilians who'd never broken a law more serious than speeding, they started getting involved. A local rancher near Fort Stockton called the FBI hotline. Said he'd heard motorcycles passing his property at 3 a.m. Couldn't see them, but the sound was unmistakable. Counted at least 20 bikes. All heading south. Another rancher, 40 miles west, reported the same thing. Different night. Different direction. A truck stop waitress in Paco served coffee to a group of bikers. Said they were polite. Left good tips. Didn't cause trouble. But they all wore the same blank faces. The same dead eyes. The kind of eyes you see on men who've done things they can't talk about and wouldn't apologize for even if they could. The human scale observations started accumulating. Texture. Detail. The kind of ground truth that doesn't show up in satellite imagery or signals intelligence. One rancher, 73 years old, fifth-generation Texan, man who'd seen everything from cattle rustlers to cartel scouts to illegal crossers dying of thirst on his land, he gave a quote that made it into every news report. "We used to count coyotes. Now we count convoys." That one sentence captured something essential about what was happening. The borderlands had always been lawless, but this was different. This was organized chaos. This was violence with purpose and planning. The cartels felt it too. Intercepted communications, the kind the NSA collects but pretends not to, showed panic in the ranks. La Reina had been more than just a trafficker. She'd been a mediator. A neutral party. Someone who could facilitate deals between rival organizations because she had dirt on everyone and loyalty to no one. With her gone, or worse, in the hands of unknown actors who might have access to her files, the entire power structure was destabilizing. Old feuds reignited. Territories got redrawn. Supply lines disrupted. The cartels started positioning assets for conflict, and when cartels position for conflict, the body count rises like floodwater. Federal intelligence predicted violence. They were right. 3 shootouts in Juarez in as many days. Bodies left in public as messages. Narco banners hung from overpasses warning rivals to back off. On the American side, spillover. A cartel scout shot dead near Del Rio. 2 bodies found in a burned-out car outside El Paso. Violence that the news media reported as drug-related, as if that explained anything, as if that made it make sense. The pressure kept building. The deadline kept ticking. And somewhere in the middle of it all, between the Mexican Marines and the American drones, between the cartel soldiers and the federal agents, between the social media frenzy and the quiet desperation of people who just wanted the violence to stop, somewhere in all that chaos, La Reina del Silencio waited. Hooded. Silent. Worth $200 million. But was she a hostage or a prisoner? A victim or a defendant? A human being or a symbol of everything broken about the border? Nobody could agree. And that disagreement was about to tear the borderlands apart. By sunrise, she was gone again. That's what the report said. That's what the official timeline claimed. That's what everyone involved swore under oath when the congressional hearings started 6 months later. But the truth, and I've spent years piecing together the truth from fragments and whispers and documents that were never meant to see daylight, the truth was messier and darker and stranger than any official narrative could accommodate. The location was a ranch outside Marathon, Texas. Population 430. The kind of town where everyone knows everyone and strangers get noticed. But this ranch was isolated even by West Texas standards. 37,000 acres of nothing but scrub brush and limestone outcroppings and silence so deep it had weight. The convoy arrived at 4:47 a.m. We know the exact time because a border patrol sensor, one of the ground sensors they plant along likely crossing routes, registered the seismic signature of multiple heavy vehicles. The data got flagged automatically, sent up the chain, and by the time anyone looked at it, whatever was going to happen had already happened. The bikers secured the perimeter first. Professional. Military. Like they'd practiced this operation a dozen times in some classified training facility that definitely doesn't exist. Then the vehicles arrived. Not marked. Not official. Just black SUVs with government plates and the kind of window tinting that says, "Don't ask questions." Men got out. No uniforms. No badges visible. But everything about them screamed federal. The haircuts. The posture. The way they moved with the absolute confidence of people backed by unlimited authority and zero accountability. The exchange took 11 minutes. La Reina del Silencio, still hooded, still zip-tied, still silent, transferred from motorcycle to SUV. No resistance. No dramatics. Just a small figure walking between armed men like a ghost attending its own funeral. The bikers got back on their machines. Engines roared. They scattered in 6 different directions, peeling off in pairs, disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness like they'd never existed at all. The SUVs drove north. Toward federal installations. Toward the kind of facilities that don't appear on any public map. And that should have been the end of the story. Except. A wildlife photographer, one of those obsessive types who spend weeks camping in the desert waiting for the perfect shot of a golden eagle or a roadrunner or whatever the hell people photograph in West Texas, he was positioned on a ridge 2 miles from the ranch. Professional equipment. Long-range telephoto lens. The kind of gear that can capture a bird's eye from half a mile away. He caught the exchange on camera. 73 photographs. High resolution. Timestamped. Showing everything. The bikers. The SUVs. The transfer. Men in tactical gear who were definitely not wearing any identifying badges or insignias. He tried to sell the photos to news organizations. They all passed. Too hot. Too dangerous. Nobody wanted to touch a story that suggested federal agents were coordinating with criminal motorcycle gangs. So he posted them online. Anonymously. Through layers of digital protection. They stayed up for 47 minutes before being scrubbed from every major platform simultaneously. Not removed by individual moderators. Deleted by some kind of coordinated action that suggested pressure from very high up the food chain. But 47 minutes is forever in internet time. The photos spread. Got downloaded. Got analyzed. Got discussed in forums and chat rooms and dark web bulletin boards where people who don't trust authority gather to share secrets the authorities don't want shared. And in those photos, if you looked carefully, if you enhanced the right frames and adjusted the contrast, you could see something interesting. Metadata. Not the standard EXIF data that cameras automatically embed. That had been stripped, scrubbed clean. But there was other metadata. Hidden data. The kind that's embedded so deep in the file structure that most people don't even know to look for it. GPS coordinates that didn't match the ranch location. Timestamps that were off by exactly 3 hours. File modification dates that showed the images had been altered after they were taken. Someone had tried to erase the digital evidence. Had gone through the photos systematically, stripping them of identifying information, making them as anonymous and untraceable as possible. They'd missed some. They always miss some. The coordinates, when plotted, showed a location in New Mexico. Near a federal facility that officially handles immigration detention but unofficially handles a lot more than that. The timestamp discrepancy suggested the photos had been processed through a system designed to obscure when and where they were actually taken. The kind of system intelligence agencies use when they want plausible deniability. The file modifications showed that someone with sophisticated technical capabilities had accessed the original images and tried to sanitize them. All of which pointed to one conclusion. This wasn't a random handoff. This was a planned operation involving federal resources and official sanction. Some captures aren't arrests. They're trades. You give us something. We give you something. Nobody talks about it. Nobody asks questions. The paperwork gets filed in a way that makes everything look legitimate and proper and completely by the book. But what was being traded? What did the bikers get in exchange for delivering La Reina del Silencio into federal custody? The theories ran wild. Immunity for past crimes. Protection from prosecution. The federal government had been trying to infiltrate outlaw motorcycle clubs for decades with limited success. Maybe this was the price of cooperation. Access to her files. The bikers wanted names. Addresses. The identities of the people who'd paid for trafficked babies. Maybe they wanted revenge. Maybe they wanted leverage. Maybe they wanted the same thing La Reina had always had, information as currency. Or maybe, and this was the darkest theory, the one that made even hardened investigators uncomfortable, maybe the bikers were just the delivery service. Maybe someone in the federal government wanted La Reina in custody but couldn't be seen to be actively hunting her. Couldn't justify the resources. Couldn't risk the political fallout. So they outsourced it. Let the criminals do the dirty work. Then swept in at the end to claim jurisdiction and control the narrative. By sunrise, she was gone again. This time escorted by men without insignias, under federal silence. But gone is such a relative term. Gone from public view, sure. Gone from the streets, absolutely. But gone in the sense of truly disappeared? Nobody knew. And not knowing became its own kind of torture for everyone involved. Rival narratives emerged within hours of the handoff. U.S. officials, speaking on background because of course they were speaking on background, claimed she was in secure federal custody. Awaiting trial. Being processed through the system. Everything perfectly legal and above board. They pointed to booking records. To case numbers. To a federal indictment that had apparently been sealed for months, just waiting for the right moment to be unsealed and announced to the world. The indictment was impressive. 97 pages. Charges ranging from human trafficking to money laundering to conspiracy to violate civil rights to about 40 other federal crimes that carried sentences adding up to multiple consecutive lifetimes. The kind of prosecutorial overkill designed to ensure she'd never see daylight again. But when journalists started digging, started asking for specifics, started requesting access to court filings and booking records and all the documentation that's supposed to be public in a system that claims to value transparency. Silence. Ongoing investigation. National security implications. Classified sources and methods. The bureaucratic stonewalling that means they're hiding something but you'll never be able to prove what. Meanwhile, across the border, Mexican press was telling a completely different story. She never left Juarez, they insisted. The whole convoy incident was theater. Smoke and mirrors. Possibly a body double or a deliberate misdirection while the Real La Reina slipped away through her underground network. Mexican federal officials pointed to surveillance footage, grainy, distant, but supposedly showing a woman matching her description at a Juarez market 3 days after the alleged kidnapping. Shopping for vegetables. Walking freely. Unguarded. The footage was analyzed by every intelligence service with an interest in the case. The conclusions ranged from probably her, to definitely not her, to impossible to determine with available evidence. But Mexican officials stuck to their story. She was back in Mexico. Beyond American reach. Protected by forces that the US government couldn't touch without triggering an international incident. And then there was the dark web chatter. Forums where cartel operatives and criminal insiders gather to share information away from official surveillance, though of course the NSA monitors these too, they just pretend they don't. These forums lit up with a third narrative. She was dead. Executed by the bikers within hours of the snatch. The ransom demand was fake. A smokescreen. What they really wanted was revenge on behalf of all the disappeared women. All the stolen babies. All the families torn apart. They'd taken her into the desert. Made her dig her own grave. Shot her and buried her where she'd never be found. The ransom video, because of course there was ransom video, grainy footage of a hooded figure that could have been anyone, that was deep-faked. Computer-generated. Advanced AI trained on the few public photos of La Reina that existed. Evidence supporting this theory, audio analysis of the ransom video showed anomalies consistent with synthetic speech generation. Pixel-level analysis showed compression artifacts suggesting digital manipulation. Evidence against this theory, the federal government's insistence she was in custody. The Mexican government's insistence she was free. Basic logic suggesting that if she was dead, someone would have claimed credit by now. 3 narratives. 3 versions of reality. All claiming to be the truth. And somewhere in the space between them, the actual truth probably existed, but good luck finding it in the fog of disinformation and official denials and digital manipulation. Congressional oversight committees got involved. Because of course they did. Nothing brings politicians running faster than a controversial case with media attention and opportunities for grandstanding. Hearings were scheduled. Witnesses were subpoenaed. Federal agents testified behind closed doors about classified operations they couldn't discuss in public sessions. The public sessions were theater. Politicians asking questions they already knew the answers to. Federal officials giving non-answers designed to sound informative while revealing nothing. I can neither confirm nor confirm the current status of the individual in question due to ongoing investigative equities and classified intelligence methodologies. Translation: I'm not telling you shit. The classified sessions were reportedly more substantive. But classified means we'll never know what was actually said. What deals were made. What truths were buried under layers of security clearance and need-to-know restrictions. Leaks suggested the committee members were deeply divided. Some believed the federal narrative. Some thought Mexico was lying to protect sovereignty. Some suspected everyone was lying and the truth was darker than any official version would admit. But leaks are just leaks. Rumors. Whispers. The kind of things that can be plausibly denied and never proven. Meanwhile, the families of the disappeared women, the real victims in all of this, the people whose pain started this whole nightmare, they organized. Protests at the border. Vigils in Juarez. Demands for answers. For accountability. For some acknowledgement that their suffering mattered. The media covered it for about a week. Then moved on. Because suffering without spectacle doesn't hold attention in our modern news cycle. Grief doesn't go viral unless it comes with dramatic footage and clear villains and narrative resolution. These families got none of that. Just the same unanswered questions. The same bureaucratic indifference. The same sense that the system designed to protect them had failed so completely it couldn't even acknowledge the failure. Somewhere between 2 governments and a biker code, the truth died quietly. Not with a bang. Not with dramatic revelation or courtroom confession or deathbed testimony. Just died. Congressional oversight committees got involved. Because of course they did. Nothing brings politicians running faster than a controversial case with media attention and opportunities for grandstanding. Hearings were scheduled. Witnesses were subpoenaed. Federal agents testified behind closed doors about classified operations they couldn't discuss in public sessions. The public sessions were theater. Politicians asking questions they already knew the answers to. Federal officials giving non-answers designed to sound informative while revealing nothing. I can neither confirm nor confirm the current status of the individual in question due to ongoing investigative equities and classified intelligence methodologies. Translation: I'm not telling you shit. The classified sessions were reportedly more substantive. But classified means we'll never know what was actually said. What deals were made. What truths were buried under layers of security clearance and need-to-know restrictions. Leaks suggested the committee members were deeply divided. Some believed the federal narrative. Some thought Mexico was lying to protect sovereignty. Some suspected everyone was lying and the truth was darker than any official version would admit. But leaks are just leaks. Rumors. Whispers. The kind of things that can be plausibly denied and never proven. Meanwhile, the families of the disappeared women, the real victims in all of this, the people whose pain started this whole nightmare, they organized. Protests at the border. Vigils in Juarez. Demands for answers. For accountability. For some acknowledgement that their suffering mattered. The media covered it for about a week. Then moved on. Because suffering without spectacle doesn't hold attention in our modern news cycle. Grief doesn't go viral unless it comes with dramatic footage and clear villains and narrative resolution. These families got none of that. Just the same unanswered questions. The same bureaucratic indifference. The same sense that the system designed to protect them had failed so completely it couldn't even acknowledge the failure. Somewhere between two governments and a biker code, the truth died quietly. Not with a bang. Not with dramatic revelation or courtroom confession or deathbed testimony. Just died. By dawn, the highways were empty again. The convoys dispersed. The checkpoints came down. The drones returned to their bases. The federal agents filed their reports and moved on to the next crisis, the next threat, the next problem that demanded immediate attention and would be forgotten just as quickly. Only tire tracks remained in the dust. Deep grooves cut into the caliche soil of West Texas. Evidence of passage. Of presence. Of something that happened even if nobody wants to admit exactly what. And the echo of engines. If you stand in the right place, on the right night, when the wind is still and the desert holds its breath, local ranchers swear you can still hear them. The Harleys. The roar. The sound of American iron carrying a secret too heavy for the law to touch. La Reina del Silencio. Is she in a federal supermax somewhere, counting the days until a trial that may never come? Locked in a cell under a false name, her identity as classified as the operations she once ran? Or is she back in Juarez, operating from the shadows again, teaching the system that tried to catch her that some people are too connected, too valuable, too dangerous to truly capture? Or is she 6 feet under in the desert, bones bleaching in the sun, her empire dismantled and distributed among those who took her down? I don't know. Nobody knows. That's the most terrifying part. In an age of total surveillance, of satellite coverage and digital tracking and the supposed impossibility of truly disappearing, one woman's fate remains a mystery. They called it justice. Maybe it was. Maybe the bikers delivered a kind of frontier justice that the courts never could. Maybe the federal agents secured a prosecution that will expose the entire network and bring closure to thousands of families. Maybe the cartels enacted their own brutal version of accountability. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe she escaped. Maybe she's still out there, still operating, still turning human desperation into profit. Maybe the whole thing was theater designed to make us think the problem was solved while the machinery grinds on. Maybe justice is the wrong word entirely. Maybe what happened that night in the Texas desert was something older and darker. Vengeance. Retribution. The kind of Old Testament reckoning that our modern legal system was designed to replace but can never quite eliminate. I think about the mothers. The disappeared women. The ones whose names we'll never know because La Reina was so good at erasing them. I think about the babies. Grown now, some of them. Living in homes across America, loved by parents who may or may not know the true origin of their children. Victims who don't even know they're victims. I think about the system that allowed this to happen. The border policies that created the desperation. The adoption industries that looked the other way. The law enforcement agencies that missed the signs for 20 years. I think about the bikers. Whoever they really were. Whatever they really wanted. Whether they were heroes or vigilantes or just another group of criminals fighting over territory and tribute. And I think about truth. How it gets buried. How it gets twisted. How it becomes weaponized and monetized and turned into just another commodity to be traded in the marketplace of narratives. The Ghost Queen of Juarez. She built an empire on silence. On the erasure of witness. On the careful, systematic destruction of evidence and memory and truth itself. And in the end, she got what she always wanted. Silence. Nobody talking. Nobody testifying. Nobody really knowing what happened or where she is or whether justice was actually served. The perfect crime isn't the one that leaves no evidence. It's the one that leaves too much evidence. Contradictory evidence. Evidence pointing in every direction at once until the truth becomes impossible to distinguish from the lies. She taught us that. Or maybe we already knew it and she just held up a mirror to show us what we'd become. If you think the war ended there, think again. Because empires don't die when their queens fall. They adapt. They evolve. Someone always steps into the power vacuum. Some new operator who learned from La Reina's mistakes. Someone smarter, more careful, harder to catch. The border is still there. The desperation is still there. The demand for trafficked babies is still there. The corruption is still there. And somewhere, in a federal cell or a Juarez safe house or a desert grave, the woman who knew all the secrets, who had all the dirt, who controlled the flow of human beings like they were just another commodity. She's still there too. Silent. Waiting. Watching to see what we'll do next. The echo of those engines still reverberates through the borderlands. A reminder that some truths are too dangerous to speak. Some justice is too dark to celebrate. Some victories leave scars that never heal. $200 million. That was the price tag they put on her head. On her life. On the secrets she carried. But what's the price of truth? What's the price of justice? What's the price of looking at a broken system and admitting it's broken instead of pretending the next arrest, the next prosecution, the next headline will somehow fix everything? We never paid that price. We chose the easier path. The narrative that let us feel good. The story that had villains and heroes and something resembling resolution. But late at night, when the desert wind howls and the dust devils dance across empty highways, the ghost queen of Juarez is still out there. In our fears. In our failures. In the silence we maintain because speaking the truth would cost too much. And maybe that's the real horror. Not that she got away. But that we let her. Subscribe for more.